everyone. Welcome to the Yakima Valley Cog-Cast, where we have an opportunity to talk about people, events, things happening in your own neighborhood. I am Chris, and today we are talking with Byron here from COG. So share with us, Byron, what it is you do here.
Certainly. So I'm the regional land use manager, and we work with all of our communities in order to make sure that they are on top of the game as far as their land use planning goes, thinking along the lines of development standards, subdivisions, some of the overarching plans that guide their goals and policies and how the city grows over a period of time.
So do you work with the developers or do you work with the cities?
A little bit of both.
Okay.
We're providing, I refer to it as kind of an a la carte service where the cities can come into YVCOG and ask for assistance if they are unfamiliar with how developers' proposal fits into their codes. They can ask for an interpretation. They can ask for assistance on where in their code to look or what state laws apply. Oftentimes, they'll just hand the complete process over to us and ask us to finish for them. So, for example, City of Union Gap may have a subdivision application and they just forward all of the application materials to us. So we take it from there and review it to make sure that the proposal meets the standards that the city has and prepare all of the notices for them so the community becomes informed of what the developer is proposing, as well as creating the staff report where we evaluate the proposed development and how it fits into their specific development.
Okay, so you've kind of hit a couple buzzwords.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to hit those. So a subdivision, what is a subdivision?
So a subdivision is when you have one piece of property and you want to create multiple pieces of property from that one piece.
Okay.
So it can be anything from creating 2 lots to creating hundreds of lots, depending on the original size of the property and what you're wanting to do.
And then you said there are ordinances. What are ordinances?
So ordinances are a series of laws that exist that are intended to create a predictable way of how development happens within the city. So a lot of people have heard of a zoning district. So your zoning district is something that's identified in a zoning ordinance, and it will say what minimum lot sizes are, what sort of uses are allowed in that area. So an example of that would be we have residential zones and we have commercial zones, and those exist to make sure that when somebody's wanting to do something on a piece of property, it's compatible in that neighborhood. So you don't have a tire shop or an auto repair place next to a house, making sure that everybody gets along and there's that compatibility.
Great. Washington State is a little different from other states in the planning world. Can you share what is different here in Washington and what does that mean for us and the people that live here?
Sure. So Washington State in the 1990s adopted a law called the Growth Management Act. And what the Growth Management Act does is the purpose is to protect the resources of the state. So think your forestry resources, think your mineral resources, think your agricultural resources. So protecting our forests and our farmlands and our mines from a lot of sprawl that was happening prior to the Growth Management Act coming into place. And the effect of protecting those resources is focusing population growth where it is best able to be handled. So urban areas where you have public water, you have public sewer, you have transportation systems that can handle the growing population that the state and the counties and the individual cities are seeing. And that's a law that isn't seen in every single state. Washington is pretty unique in having the Growth Management Act.
Does that mean that our cities have some specific rules they have to go by also with planning, so they don't have the freedom to just make decisions with all of the land that they own?
So the way that it works is the Growth Management Act creates a series of bookends, if you will, where cities can play within those bookends or create laws that meet the purpose and the intent of the Growth Management Act, but it's custom built to reflect the desires and the needs of that individual community.
So the city may or may not agree with whatever the rule is, but they're required to adhere to that rule. Each city and town in the county is required to put together their plans that we call the comprehensive plan, which includes different sections in that book. Can you share with us what are those different sections that we call a comprehensive plan?
Sure. So a comprehensive plan is a combination of a number of chapters or sections or elements, or what they're called, within the comprehensive plan. And there is a list of mandatory elements that every single community that is planning under the Growth Management Act is required to have. Some of them are standalone, and some of them get folded into some of the other elements. So we have a land use element, we have a housing element, capital facilities, utilities, transportation, economic development, parks and recreation, and climate change and resiliency. So within those elements, for example, the land use element is looking at how land is going to be used within the community. So identifying the needs for growing population. So you're going to need X number of residential lands for that use. You need X number of acres of commercial land to support businesses and operations within that community. And similarly, there's industrial lands that get zoned as well. And then a lot of communities fine-tune their zoning districts so they can break up the different areas of land use and also have parks and recreation. So you have municipal uses as its own zoning district. So all the uses that may potentially exist within a city are identified in that land use element. So over the next 20 years, the city can realize its vision for what it's going to look like. Housing, we're looking at the number of dwelling units that are needed to accommodate that population. There's some recent laws in place where the number of houses that exist in the community need to be separated by income brackets. So if you have a population of your community that is low income, we want to make sure that housing is being created to address their needs rather than having large, expensive homes that they would never be able to afford. And it continues with all the other different elements. So it allows the different cities to see what they're going to need over the time period of the comprehensive plan.
So you called them elements. So these different sections, these different plans. How long did you say that a city has to project out what that plan would be for maybe housing development?
20 years.
20 years.
Yep. We look at population projections 20 years out and the growth of the city off of those numbers. And it's the way that number is come up with is a trickle-down method, if you will. So the State Office of Financial Management comes up with the number of people that are going to be moving into Washington State over the next 20 years. And they identify how much of that population is going to be allocated to each of the counties within the state. Then the county looks and allocates the number of people to each of the individual cities, so that the cities then know if they're going to be seeing an extra 1,000 people for the next 20 years or 5,000 people. It really depends on how the city's grown over the last 10 years and is used to predict what sort of population the city will have over the next 20 years.
That's a lot for a city to try to look into a crystal ball to come up with what that will look like
certainly,
for 20 years.
Certainly. And it's challenging because recently a lot of our communities have seen some really rapid growth. And for example, the city of Tieton and the town of Natchez, those numbers are predicting their population to double in the next 20 years. So if you're familiar with those communities and you think you're going to need there's going to be twice as many people living there for the next 20 years, where are they going to fit? Where are they going to go? What sort of businesses are going to be needed to support that population? And that's part of the Growth Management Act, where we're looking at that to try and make sure that it's well planned out growth that's going to meet the needs for each individual community.
This last year, the state legislature added a required plan to be included in all of the cities and towns and the counties comp plan. So that book of all of their plans of what the next 20 years is going to look like. Can you share what they are requiring and why they're requiring it?
The newest requirement is climate change and resiliency. It is an acknowledgement that our weather patterns are changing. We're seeing increased hazards from how the world is changing. So we have seen increased fire risks, indoor air quality quality, flooding, all of those things. Climate change and resiliency element is intended to address is how those individual communities are going to be impacted by those changes, and look at their risks and their vulnerabilities and put together a way to respond when they're impacted by something. So what boiled down is a recognition of the increased frequency of these events and how they're happening over and over again, and it's seeing these repetitive losses and impacts to how the community lives their lives, with roads being shut down, evacuation notices from wildfires, and want to have something on the book so if something happens, the community can know what they need to do in order to bounce back.
That's a great explanation. Part of the process is to have the public's input for the plan in different ways. Each city will handle these different situations. Can you give a couple of examples of what this could look like?
So the way that we're seeking input from the community is in a few different ways. The primary method is a survey where we are going to be asking everyone who lives in the community to fill out this survey so we can identify a couple of different things. One of the things that we need to know is what each community's quote community assets are. And a community asset is a fire station, or it could be a community center. It can also be services such as Meals on Wheels. It could be your transportation system. So we're looking to find out which community assets each city has as identified by the people that live there. And then the next step is going to be looking at the different risks that exist from the changing climate and how they impact those community assets and how vulnerable they are to them. So an example in everybody's recent memory is the retreat fire on White Pass shut down Highway 12 and really impacted the movement of people and goods and freight throughout the valley. And we want to know from the community, do they see that as a priority? What sort of, if you have a business that relied on delivery of goods over the White Pass corridor, that's going to severely impact your means of life. So we want to find what the community sees as their biggest risks or the biggest vulnerabilities, so we can then try and address those through goals and policies and ways to be able to reroute traffic or find other means where people can be living their life.
How would a decision that affects a person living in a city, for instance, if there's a drought, what could the plan say a city would do? How could they handle something like that?
So an example of addressing drought would be looking at ways to make water go further. So an example is if the community has a street tree ordinance where they go in and plant trees along roadways, or they have a list of species of trees they use in the parks, creating a list or updating that list so those tree species would be drought tolerant, so that if we're seeing increased temperatures and drought, that all these trees in your parks don't end up dying. Or we could be looking at ways to change how, we mentioned subdivision earlier, how development standards within a subdivision may apply. So maybe limiting the amount of grass lawn that's in somebody's landscaping, so there isn't the greatest demand of irrigation water for lawns. It could be used for making sure that farmers have enough water for their orchards and their crops and things like that. So we can kind of create this resiliency to make sure everything persists even in the face of a drought.
Those are tough decisions because these people, everything's a priority. And then having to narrow that down is going to be difficult for those city leaders when they're developing this specific plan. How can the public make sure that their voice is heard by their city council and through this process?
Being engaged. We have this survey that's going out to all of the households. If people want their voices heard, they need to participate. We want to hear from people that are living within those communities what their concerns are. We're putting together this survey so we can show the results of that to to the city leaders. So when they're making their decisions on what the priorities are for addressing different types of risks within the community, they'll see what the city identifies, the people that live there, what the community identifies as their most important issues, so it can help reinforce the community leader's decision within the climate element and identifying those goals and policies.
So when this plan is made, maybe the decision of Tieton City Council, that leadership, they could choose a completely different process and priorities than maybe one of our other communities like Sela or Union Gap, Grandview.
Certainly, there are parts of the climate element that every city needs to address. Each city has the ability and the control to identify where they want to focus their resources. So an example of that would be where the city of Sela has flooding issues because they're along the Yakima River, and Hera does not have any floodplains within its city limits or its town limits. So they wouldn't have those same concerns, and the city's able to customize the climate element to directly address the issues that community is facing.
Great. So they are individualized.
Yes.
For each city. And will you be taking the comments and the information back to the city councils?
So we don't have a specific date in mind with the climate element process. We are going to be shortly sending out those surveys to the households. Once we get those survey results back and we start getting that information in is when we will be compiling that and analyzing that and bringing that data in front of city council to inform them, to educate them, and get feedback from the city leaders on whether or not they agree with the different priorities that would be identified. So it may be something where city council, so an example for Sela is they're looking at a potential new freeway access point, Interstate 82, and the community may not be necessarily aware of that because it's in the very early stages of planning. So city council will be able to be making their educated decisions and find the priorities work for them.
Okay. When this survey goes out, do you just want one person from the home to reply to this survey, or do you want everybody in the home to reply to the survey, especially those teenagers and kids who are going to be living with whatever this plan says over the next 20 years?
We want everybody to give us a response to the survey. The more information we have, the more responses we have, the better the plan is going to be, and the better it will be addressing the needs of the community.
Okay. And this survey, it will identify which city a person lives in so that we're making sure to take the right information back to that council.
Yes. It allows you to identify which city that you live in and asks you questions about what the community assets are, what the risks are, what the priorities are. And we really want to use the community's input to help us think outside the box and identify some things that we may not be thinking of ourselves.
Also, the public, they can respond to the survey, which we definitely want everybody to do, but they also can go to the council meeting to share some of their comments. What type of impact does that make when a person actually shows up to a council meeting to share what their concerns or why they support something or why they don't support something?
I think it is a huge impact when somebody shows up in person. It shows that there is the importance of that issue that they want to communicate to the city leaders and have the city take their concerns and their ideas into consideration when city council is making their decisions. I think that it's really important to be specific, addressing the city council and letting them know you are wanting them to focus on. So if you have large concern over the transportation system, if your business relies on goods coming in and out of the city, letting them know that that's your priority, so your livelihood wouldn't be impacted by a disruption to that service, or you live along the river and would be subject to flooding and potentially face the loss of your home or damage to your home, letting the council know specifically what your concerns are so so that they can hear it firsthand and realize that their community is engaged in this and definitely have a for this process.
Right. And they don't need to know any of the buzzwords. They don't need to know. They can just go in and share with council what really would impact their lives in a positive way or a negative way based on the decisions that the council will make for this plan. Perfect. Well, thank you, Byron.
Very welcome.
This is very informative. I hope everybody responds to the survey when you see that. Thank you for joining this Cog-Cast, and make sure you click like and subscribe and share this with your neighbors in your community.